Juan, I want to get beyond the rhetoric. It turns out, because everybody agrees rhetoric in a speech is nice, but the key is the policy, what he actually does. It turns out that the CIA, I was fascinated to learn that this week, the CIA has launched more Predator drone strikes in less than a year under President Obama than it did during 8 years of President Bush. And in fact, just this week, they took out a top al-Qaeda operative. And we're seeing a chorus now from the Obama administration talking about the diplomatic engagement is over. Come the beginning of the new year, we're going to get tough with Iran. Do you think this is no more Mr. Nice Guy?
Well, I guess the philosopher king was on display this week. When you have not only Bill Kristol, but Liz Cheney and Sarah Palin praising the speech, you know that something's gone wrong here. This is a militaristic speech. He's justifying the use of war at a time when our country has been through 8 years of war based on this preemptive doctrine that Bill referred to by George W. Bush that proved absolutely a mess. There were no weapons of mass destruction. We're caught in a war in Afghanistan where we've been in there for 8 years and we don't know what we're doing. And when it comes to Iran, so what does this speech mean? Does it mean now that Israel is justified in taking out Iran, taking unilateral action against Iran? Is that what he's signaling? Where is the man who spoke up for human rights? Not in this speech, and certainly not in his actions, not in his actions against Sudan, where Darfur is taking place, not in his actions. He speaks about Egypt and Mubarak as heroes. This is craziness. But somehow, the philosopher king, everybody's making excuses for President Obama in this situation. But to me, this is a situation where he has escalated a war. He gets the Nobel Prize based on the idea that he is more a man about diplomacy and international cooperation in dealing with these kinds of threats, and has to reach back to World War II and Hitler to justify the steps that he's taking at this point.
Well, Crystal, are you going to stand for Juan Williams continuing to run down this president?
I think it's terrible, you know, and I'm sure the president's very upset by it. No, it shows how possibly important this speech is, in the sense that he really has, I think, partly because of the Afghanistan decision, but partly because of the failure of his engagement efforts. He tried it. He was entitled to. He won the election. He said he wanted to engage Iran. He said he wanted to have a reset button with Russia. He said he wanted to have, he did an Asia trip where he was Chinese. On human rights, he's totally pulled his punches, really almost shamefully so, I'd say, in the case of the Iranians who went into the streets in June. None of it has worked. And I very much hope he has really learned the lesson that it hasn't worked. You know, what Mara mentioned, there's still a lot of stuff in the speech that I'm not crazy about, as Liz suggested. Mara mentioned the fact that he does talk a lot about acting together, acting in concert. But there's this one sentence: there will be times when nations, acting individually or in concert, will find the use of force not only necessary but morally justified.
Well,
that's a pretty striking statement. I mean, I think any American president should say that, who's looking at Iran developing nuclear weapons. I think he is. It's not just that Israel might use preemptive force against Iran. This speech lays the predicate for a legitimate use of force to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons by the U.S.
But 11 months in, you're saying give up on talking, give up on the use of sanctions. He's tried all the things.
He isn't saying give up on the use of sanctions.
That's what Bill Kristol just said. Okay, but I'm saying that's why last week I said, you know, why is President Obama reacting to the generals and to the faux generals like General Kristol, who are calling for more military action, more aggression?
You know,
what happened to Barack Obama?
All I'm saying is I think you guys are missing something. I mean, he laid out a kind of Obama doctrine, or the beginnings of it, on engagement and sanctions and what happens when engagement fails and how important it is to at least try first. In other words, he talked about the satisfying purity of indignation, that's not a very good alternative. This is a president who's evolving, and he did try something first. He's not completely rejecting it, but things have to happen in order.
All right.
And that's what he's doing.
We have to step aside for a moment, but when we come back,